Welcome to the first video module for learning about self-care and social work practice. My name is Sarah Bressi, and I'm excited to lead you through the first module today. The current module will cover 5 key points. First, we will define self-care and social work practice. Second, we'll outline that self-care is a chief strategy for reducing the incidence of burnout in professional social work practice. Next, we'll discuss how self-care should be focused on 2 primary targets, namely affect regulation and meaning making. Finally, we will highlight the importance of self-care for creating trauma-informed services for vulnerable persons. My article, published in 2017 with my co-author Liz Vaden, defines self-care as inclusive of agentic, self-regulated activities that purposefully bolster the ability to sit within, tolerate, and understand the affective and identity dysregulation related to experiencing vulnerability and uncertainty in the social work relationship, and make meaning of the ways workers' selves are changed from work with clients. This definition reflects the Council on Social Work Education's core competencies aimed at use of reflection and self-regulation to manage personal values and maintain professionalism in practice, an application of self-awareness and self-regulation to manage the influence of personal biases and values in working with diverse clients and constituencies. In essence, CSWE is challenging social workers to regulate themselves to a sufficient extent to protect clients. This is self-care. The definition also outlines the 2 primary targets of self-care, namely affect regulation and meaning making. We'll turn to those in a moment. Self-care may take many forms and involve quiet, contemplative practices such as prayer or yoga or meditation. It may also include activities such as exercise, listening to or making music, or cooking. Some self-care practices are creative and generative. Others create mental space for thinking and processing. Some engage other people. Others are more solitary. The choice of self-care practices really just depends on the self that needs care. So why do we care about self-care? Self-care is a primary strategy for ameliorating burnout in the field of social work. Social workers increasingly function within treatment settings, charged with doing more with less, and thus professional burnout and its sequelae remain a substantial threat to the development of an effective and sustainable workforce. Over 40 years ago, Freudenberger helped coin the term burnout as involving a process of wearing out or becoming exhausted by making excessive demands on energy, strength, or resources. Although the definition of burnout is underdeveloped and varies, a widely used conceptualization from Maslach and colleagues delineates burnout to be a psychological syndrome involving emotional exhaustion, a resultant tendency towards depersonalizing client groups, and a feeling of decreased efficacy on the job. As such, burnout contributes to a withdrawal from engagement with clients, threatens major disruptions in continuity of care through eliciting high turnover rates within agencies, or hastens exit from the field altogether. High turnover rates and the lack of emotional safety from burnout doesn't lend itself to offering trauma-informed services. We'll talk more about that a bit later. Let's talk more about the aspects of burnout delineated by Maslach and colleagues. First, depersonalization is a separation of feelings about the client group and often results in a chronic sense of othering the client group in pejorative ways. Burnout also involves a decreased sense of feeling effective or competent at work. It creates the sense that one cannot make real change in their role. Finally, emotional exhaustion is just as it sounds. Work with clients leaves one feeling run down, tired, depressed, or deadened. So why is this happening? And how does self-care combat burnout? Self-care is a pathway towards helping us regulate the powerful emotions that emerge in the social work relationship, such as fear, anxiety, shame, and sadness, that are often presented to us and elicited in us by our clients, especially those who have experiences with trauma. To regulate emotions means we can fully be in our feelings and bodily arousal states, and have the ability to turn these feelings up or down to lead us back to homeostasis. We learn the ability to regulate feelings throughout our lives, and this begins in the first moments of life. The skill of affect regulation is rooted in our attachment relationships. However, we need to develop this skill, and as with all skills, repeated practice helps us build up our ability to regulate feelings. Our clients with adverse childhood experiences or disrupted attachment relationships often struggle with affect regulation. They feel dysregulated, and so it makes sense why we can get so dysregulated. The neurobiology of emotional regulation is important to consider, and we will review that now. The brain's limbic system communicates with our brainstem and our higher brain regions, namely the cortex, to create the complex mind and body experiences of emotions. The limbic system is considered the major area of our brains for affect regulation. In the context of negative life experiences or chronic stress, the limbic system may become consistently overactivated, leading to a sense of hyperarousal or being on high alert for danger. This has many difficult impacts on the ability to accurately assess danger and, in turn, return the body to homeostasis. Let's take a look at a short video about the limbic system.
Welcome to this short video by Sutton Brain Hub on the anatomy of the limbic system. So, the limbic system is a group of brain structures found deep beneath the cerebral cortex and sits just above the brainstem. Its main function is involved in regulating many of our emotions and motivations, particularly those related to survival, such as fear, anger, hunger, and sexual behaviour. But it is also involved in higher mental functions, such as learning and memory. The limbic system is the reason that some physical things, such as eating, seem so pleasurable to us, and the reason why some medical conditions, such as high blood pressure, are caused by mental stress. Unfortunately, there is no consensus as to what structures constitute the whole of the limbic system, so in this video we'll stick to those viewed as the most important. Firstly, if we have a look at the amygdala, which here we have coloured in blue, the amygdala is a small almond-shaped structure located deep and medially within both temporal lobes. This is often known as the emotional centre of the brain, as it is responsible for fear conditioning or the associative learning process by which we learn to fear something. If we were to stimulate this area, we would induce emotions such as anger, violence, fear and anxiety. On the other hand, if we were to damage both amygdalae, we would lose the ability to feel these emotions and become much more mellow and develop disinhibited behaviours. This is called Kluver-Bucy syndrome. Now the amygdala is in close proximity to the hippocampus, which here we have coloured in purple. The hippocampus plays a key role in forming and storing new memories, in particular consolidating short-term memories to long-term memories. If we were to damage our hippocampi, we would develop a condition called anterograde amnesia, which is the inability to form new memories, although older memories such as those from childhood would still be safe. Now the hippocampus sends C-shaped axonal projections through the forebrain, around the diencephalon and into the hypothalamus via the fornix, which we have here coloured in yellow. The hypothalamus, which is coloured in green, is a small group of nuclei that have many different functions. For example, it plays a major role in regulating the endocrine system, in particular through its close connections to the pituitary gland via the infundibulum and the hypophyseal portal system. It also regulates our autonomic nervous system, which includes functions like the fight and flight or rest and digest responses and body temperature. It is also involved in regulating our sleep-wake cycle in response to light and many other vital activities. Just superior to the hypothalamus, we have the thalamus, coloured in red, which is a large mass of grey matter cells that constitute the main relay station in the brain, whereby sensory and motor signals are sent to and from the spinal cord and the cerebrum. This is important in the limbic system as much of what we see, hear and feel influences our emotions. Finally, the thalamus has many connections to the cingulate gyrus, coloured here in grey, which is located on the medial aspect of the brain just superior to the corpus callosum, and which is then separated by the callosal sulcus and bordered then superiorly by the cingulate sulcus. The cingulate gyrus helps regulate pain and emotion, but is particularly involved in driving the body's conscious response to unpleasant experiences, and therefore the avoidance of negative consequences. So in summary, the limbic system comprises of a complex group of structures that are important in various functions, such as interpreting emotional responses, storing memories, and regulating bodily functions. That's our quick overview of the limbic system, so thanks for watching.
Activation of feelings intersects with our whole body. Returning to neurobiology for another moment, the HPA axis, which is reviewed in the following video, demonstrates the intricate feedback loop between our brains and our bodies, in particular around stress or fear responses. This is why self-care activities that engage our bodies are also very important.
Welcome to 2-Minute Neuroscience, where I simplistically explain neuroscience topics in 2 minutes or less. In this installment, I will discuss the HPA axis. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, or HPA axis, is best known for its role in our body's natural reaction to stress. The HPA axis includes a group of hormone-secreting glands from the nervous and endocrine systems. The hypothalamus is a small neuroendocrine structure situated just above the brainstem that controls the release of hormones from the pituitary gland, a hormone-secreting gland that sits just below the hypothalamus. The pituitary gland can release hormones into the bloodstream that travel down to the kidneys and influence the secretion of hormones from endocrine glands called the adrenal glands, which sit on top of the kidneys. The primary function of the HPA axis is to regulate the stress response. When we experience something stressful, the hypothalamus releases a hormone called corticotropin-releasing hormone, or CRH. CRH signals the pituitary gland to secrete a hormone called adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH, into the bloodstream. ACTH travels down to the adrenal glands where it prompts the release of different hormones from different parts of the adrenal glands. It causes the secretion of a class of steroid hormones called glucocorticoids from the cortex or outer layer of the adrenal glands. One of these glucocorticoids is cortisol, which plays an important role in the stress response. ACTH also triggers the secretion of epinephrine and norepinephrine from the adrenal medulla, which is the center of the adrenal glands. Epinephrine and norepinephrine are substances that act as hormones and neurotransmitters. When released from the adrenal glands, they act as hormones. The release of cortisol causes a number of changes that help the body to deal with stress. For example, it helps to mobilize energy, like glucose, so the body has enough energy to cope with a prolonged stressor. Norepinephrine and epinephrine act to keep the body vigilant and able to deal with the stressor by promoting alertness, and by increasing blood flow to skeletal muscles to ensure they are ready to act. When cortisol levels in the blood get high, this is sensed by receptors in areas of the brain like the hypothalamus, which leads to the shutting off of the stress response through what is known as a negative feedback mechanism.
Another target of self-care that is incredibly important is the idea of meaning-making. Self-care strategies need to include mechanisms for meaning-making and self-discovery. Relational models and a recovery orientation assume that the social work relationship is the vehicle for interventions that produce change in both the worker and the client in a bidirectional, co-constructed fashion. These models normalize and encourage workers to actively reflect on the ways work with clients bring meaning to their lives. Self-care activities oriented towards meaning-making might include journaling, creative writing, artistic endeavors, peer-to-peer discussions, or engagement in advocacy efforts that highlight specific self-discoveries that emerge from deep engagement with others in therapeutic contexts. In other words, self-care should also provide opportunities for making sense of our work with clients and provide space for incorporating the lessons they teach us in our day-to-day lives. Trauma-informed care, as defined by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, realizes the widespread impact of trauma, recognizes the signs and symptoms of trauma, responds to needs at the level of policies, practices, and system structures, and actively resists re-traumatization of the client group by creating safe environments. Thus, self-care in regulating affect and creating space for meaning-making allows for workers to feel safe, and this is required for clients to feel safe. The self-care plan, which will be reviewed in the next module, will allow an opportunity for you to think about your own practices of self-care, as well as for thinking about how self-care is or could be built into your agency.